This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So let me first welcome Dr. Alfat, who has become a recent celebrity in the prostate cancer world for creating, participating, and recording his experience with Erleada or apalutamide as a monotherapy. And probably I think what we will do today is to, even though we thought Al wasn't going to be able to reach us until about 6:30, he's been able to call in, so he's with us right now. And I really want to accord as much time to this as we can. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody who is new to the call, so we have right now a lot of time. I want to give Al as much time as he would like to take, and I want to give you as much time as you would like to take to talk to Al about the issues that surround this this protocol, this drug protocol that he has embarked on. I think most of you know that apalutamide or Erleada was approved earlier this year for non-metastatic castrate-resistant hormone therapy. And that is also the same category for which enzalutamide has been approved. It's also been approved in other categories too. Now, if you read email newsletter that I send out, one of the issues that has always concerned me a little bit about that use is, well, what do they mean by non-metastatic? And because it's always bothered me from the very first time I heard it as to how you could truly be non-metastatic if you were castrate resistant. What I learned when I was at PCRI was that non-metastatic, and by the way, this was in a presentation by a professional from Janssen who manufactures Erleada apalutamide. What I learned was that the definition of non-metastatic includes lymph node disease, which I suppose I probably, if I would have paid greater attention to the trials, I would have seen that before. So what in fact I'm learning is that the drug companies, in order to separate themselves and create a drug in a space where there may not be anything else, can fool around a little bit with terms like what is metastatic and what isn't metastatic. I think most of the people on this call, if they had extensive lymph node disease, or even not so extensive lymph node disease, but there was no evidence in soft tissue or in bone, would consider themselves to have metastatic disease. So one of the things that I would want to suggest to Janssen is that they make it very clear that non-metastatic disease includes lymph node metastasis. It's not 100% clear to me whether non-metastatic includes people who would be in, say, a PETA situation where there is evidence of abdominal lymphatic disease. Whether that then takes them out of the non-metastatic category or not, it's not clear to me. But I do think it's really important that men who have lymph node disease understand that apalutamide is a drug that's available to them. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Alfat to tell you a little bit about his history and what he did before and how he came to this trial. Al, by the way, called in on the phone, so you won't be able to see him on the screen tonight. Al, the floor is yours.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so I'm just going to mention a few of the key takeaway points that we'll have time to discuss afterwards, I hope. I think the first one, and for me the most important one, is this so-called era of precision medicine and personalized oncology. There's really no reason why everybody shouldn't be able to be the subject in their own single subject research design. I'm a research scientist by nature. That's I bring that to me. Hippocrates is supposed to have said that it's more important to know which person the disease has than which disease the person has, and this cancer attached itself to a research scientist. So we both have to deal with that fact. Don't get all your information from experts and the published literature. Peer support and being out there listening. That's how I whittled my way into an opportunity to take Erlita. And I treat these opportunities to speak and to attend meetings and whatever as sort of like an obligation to share what I can, and an opportunity to know. I think that's really important. I think your level of risk tolerance is important. You have to know that, what you're able to deal with in the way of anxiety, and particularly when you stray off the beaten path like I have several times. You just be aware that you're doing that, and I have a barometer that will bring me back. That it's a research-based protocol that I'm following. So if I get too far afield, I know it's time to try something else. I know it pretty quickly. I know it even quicker than treating me know it. Just in terms of my being able to stay on top of my my PSA fluctuations the way I am. Not to be arrogant about that, but I've got a pretty good barometer of when things are going well and not going well. Taking ownership of your own treatment, and to find an oncologist that you can collaborate with. That may seem incompatible, and for a long time I struggled with that, sort of arrogantly self-directing my own treatment because I didn't really trust the person who was my oncologist. But having sort of come to terms with the fact that I don't need to play doctor, don't want to play doctor, I found somebody who I can really trust and rely on his judgment. And he treats me like a collaborator. He gives me a lot of leeway. I come to him with a hypothesis, and I tell him how I'm going to test it, and he says, go ahead and go for it, or don't. I think there's a better way. We negotiated around that. So I think it's really important to do both of those things. It's much more helpful, I think, to think of long-term sustainable remissions rather than cures. I don't think there is a cure for this disease. I think it's a long-term management problem. And with that in mind, it's a long game rather than a short game. So, anything that happens, happens, and it's behind, and you try and move forward as much as I can. It took me a long time to learn that. I resented my early treatment failures because I just wanted to get rid of this thing, and I realized that that's not going to happen. I'm never going to be rid of it. So with that in mind, this is my history. This is what it was like before I was diagnosed. I was, born in Western Pennsylvania with that kind of lifestyle, lots of red meat, drinking, not much in the way of, lifestyle considerations, erratic exercise, all those things that I probably could have done, wish I would have done, but didn't do. A casual conversation with my primary care physician back in probably it was May of 2014, when I reminded him that we hadn't had a prostate cancer test done. I didn't have a PSA read. I wasn't graphing them, but we were sort of keeping track of them. I wasn't feeling particularly, problematic. In fact, I mentioned to him that I was feeling really good. I had a lot of problems. I had a sick prostate, I realized, for years. That I was, getting all kinds of treatments for, and urinary urgency, and I had a volumetric test done. I wasn't emptying my, so, I was having a lot of problems with my bladder, my prostate for years before, but there was no particular reason why I mentioned that to him. And fortunately I did. And he said, okay, yeah, well, if we're going to do that, I might as well do a digital rectal exam. And then he said, well, we definitely are going to do a PSA test. And my numbers, the only reference I'll make to my graph is this reference here, that the number that came back before I had gone to that visit, my PSA before the one I'm going to describe now, was 3.75 nanograms per milliliter. And that was under 4, and we had no real concern about it. But when I went back and looked at it in the context of other values that I had gotten in the 3 years previously, it was a blip. Now, a blip like that, you wouldn't think cancer, but it was something that was definitely not just a random fluctuation. It was a signal that I didn't pay any attention to, and I now see it as the beginning of my the upsurge in my cancer, which I think was laying dormant for a long time. But at any rate, following that DRE and then the biopsy that followed that, and the imaging studies that followed that, it looked going into surgery like I had a Gleason 9 4.5. And that was all within the space of about 2.5 months. It was just like a whirlwind, as I'm sure many of you experience it. And I settled on surgery and robotic surgery just from what I was able to read and surfing the internet. But I didn't have any support group experience, and I wish I had. I think that's probably another message, is there's always time to get more information. I wish I had, but I don't look backwards anymore. For a long time, though, I was angry about that, because it was pretty clear from the failed surgery and the failed salvage radiation that I already had metastatic disease at the time the surgery was done, although there were no real signs of it. There were some margins that needed to be cleaned up after the surgery, but all the imaging studies they did after the surgery and between then and when I had the salvage radiation treatment indicated that the cancer was probably confined to my prostate bed. I had about a 50-50 chance of curing it. And again, I went for the cure, and I went for the cure with a vengeance. I used to go into the radiation machine, and it was like, bring it on, I'm going to get you before you get me. I had this mentality, that it was a war against cancer, and if there was anybody who was going to win, it was going to be me and not it. And I learned pretty quickly after the radiation treatment that I missed it again. It didn't go away. I knew before my radiation oncology, I knew from the first reading, and my surgeon agreed with me. If you looked at the graph, the second time I'll mention it, you can see that the PSA readings just pick up where the other left off. And the radiation oncologist was saying, oh, that's just irritation. I said, no, that's just not irritation afterwards. We didn't touch this sucker at all. We just inconvenienced it and bumped it over a couple of months. And then you can see that, and it's off and running again at the same doubling time that it was right after the surgery. And that's another thing that I think is true of cancers. It's certainly true of my cancer, is when they grow, they tend to grow at a pretty consistent rate. And mine doubles about every 2.5, 3 months when it's growing. So I can tell when it's active. And then I think sometimes cancers spontaneously or in response to who knows what become metabolically inactive for a while. And I was able to put mine to sleep for about 4 months by flooding it with medical marijuana. It certainly didn't see that coming. and I shut it down pretty dramatically. And the medical people don't like to acknowledge that, but if there had been any other kind of standard medical treatment based on those PSA kinetics, that had been saying, yeah, this is looking good, this is looking good. For the first time since I started treatment, I actually had a lower PSA test result on one occasion than they did previously. And the PSA flatlined on the graph for about 4 months. And then it started to go back up again because I just couldn't stand the protocol. The protocol was horrible. We can talk about that some other time. But it was really tough. The Rick Simpson oral protocol was a killer for me in terms of my endurance. I just, I was really just a zombie. Then I tried to play around with it again with another formulation, and it leveled off a little bit. And then I just said, to hell with it. I'm not going to do anything for a while. Relax. And I did, and my PSA got up to about 61, up into 51, I guess, 51. And my doctor agreed that, I wasn't symptomatic, so there was no real need to start androgen deprivation therapy. I was really afraid of it from everything I had heard and read. It's just like, oh, God, no, I want anything but that, So I delayed as long as I could. And then somebody in our in my support group had really good results with Casodex. He had about 12 years of keeping his PSA at bay and no signs of cancer on any of the imaging studies, just using Casodex. So I determined that that's what we're going to do. We're going to do Casodex. And I did 150 milligrams of Casodex, and I brought the thing down. Or at least it wasn't growing. My doctor disputed that the PSA decline with Casodex as a monotherapy indicates that the cancer's, shrinking. And I wasn't looking to shrink it. I was just looking to stop it. And he did agree with me, well, if it's coming down like that, it's not growing. So, it went down. The PSA went down. I thought I put the cancer on hold for a while. But believe me, Casodex is not ADT light, at least for this camper. I had a really, much tougher time with it than I did with hormone therapy when I eventually jumped on board with it, which I did shortly after that. The increase again was the fastest doubling time in my experience. It was sort of like catching up with lost time. And it got up to 161 before I started my trial with Firmagon. But before I did that, I was at a conference, the state conferences of prostate cancer alliances was 2 years ago in Washington, D.C., and I met a representative from Dendreon there, and we were talking, and he said, I think you would qualify with that. I showed him my graph, and I was carrying my graph around with me. He said, I think you would qualify for a trial with Prevenge because technically you did fail a hormone therapy. And I said, yeah, well, great. I want to try that. I want to try it when I'm healthy. I don't believe in protocol-driven treatment. I think there's something that the drug companies and the FDA and the insurance companies sort of conspire to put together. I think, you should have a testable hypothesis. And mine was that it's better to take Prevenge when you're healthy than when you're not healthy. That just seemed like a no-brainer to me. Why would you wait until you're really sick and your immune system is depleted before you took a medication that's going to try and reactivate your immune system? So I was able to take it before I took an androgen deprivation agent, and I found an oncologist at the same time that I did that, who I trusted, and actually in his office during the initial consultation, I said to him, we're going to have to do this eventually, aren't we? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, let's just start today. And my wife was with me. She said, really? Yeah, I said, yeah. Let's just start today. So I got my Firmagon shot that day, but he knew I was starting. In fact, I had just started the week before having my first infusion with the Prevenge. And he said, well, it's not going to interfere with anything, you know. I mean, I wouldn't do it that way. There's no indication that it's really going to work on you now. But, you know, I had a rationale for wanting to do it, and he was very willing to let me try. And so I broke the protocol at that point. I mean, at that point, I've got a PSA of 161. I just want to find something that's working. I'm not trying to tease out anymore why it's working. I just want to get something that's working, that's getting this cancer to be, you know, manageable, and that I can tolerate the side effects. So that's why I did that. And I'll never be able to really make any statements about the interactions between Prevenge and any other medication, or even what Firmagon would have done by itself. But Firmagon had a pretty good run for a couple of months, and then it plateaued very quickly. And I was able to see the plateau very clearly. It plateaued at about 5, you know, nanograms per milliliter, and I was castrated as hell. I mean, I had one T test came back less than 3, so I had no circulating testosterone to speak of. And, you know, I saw the handwriting on the wall, and I said to my oncologist, you know, I don't want to play this out and become, you know, officially castrate resistant. I already am. By that time, there had been enough imaging studies, and just even the results of you know, all these, you know, interventions and everything. It's obviously my cancer has metastasized somewhere. For a long time, it was really hard to find it, even with the, you know, imaging studies. I've had a lot of imaging studies with and without contrast. I had one really good radiologist who I took all my imaging studies to, and she looked at them all sequentially rather than just one against the next, you know, the last one. And she said, I see a couple of spots here that look like they're getting progressively more clear. So I think you've got a couple of bone mets, which has become more clear to people now. So I really think I can officially say I've got, you know, metastatic, you know, stage 4 prostate cancer. So really, I've got no business even taking Erleada at all, according to the protocol, right? I don't have non-metastatic cancer. I've got metastatic cancer. I'm not castrate resistant yet, but you know, it just made sense for me to try that, and it didn't make sense for me to try it on top of a medication that's not working and is already producing side effects that I can manage. But why I just didn't want to add another set of side effects on top of those side effects with a medication that had pretty well played itself out. And, you know, my oncologist said, you know, I wanted to wait longer to see if I would have a delayed effect from the Prevenge. I think Rick mentioned that in one of his comments on the study, is that, well, this could be a delayed effect of the Prevenge. I can't rule that out. I can't say it wasn't. I wanted to try and allow for that. I was going to try and give myself a drug holiday. I thought, wow, you know, if the Prevenge can keep the cancer at bay. Again, this is all indexed by PSA progression, but that's one of the best, you know, measures we have of, you know, cancer activity. You know, if it's not growing, your PSA probably is going to stay fairly stable, and if it is growing, particularly if it's growing rapidly, your PSA incline is going to show that. So, you know, I was willing to wait until I got a PSA progression, and he said, I got a better idea for you. Why don't you not do that? Why don't you give yourself a chance to get lucky with some residual Firmagon in your system, because there is some evidence that they might synergize each other. So again, I can't say that the effect that I have initially is not due to a combination of the Erleada and the residual Firmagon. But it gets less likely as the effect continues. Now, I haven't had any Firmagon in 3 months. So I've got 2 months of treatment with Erleada, and then the last month where I missed the shot that I would have taken, you know, with the Firmagon. So It's really been 3 months, and the result has been really spectacular, and I think kind of unanticipated, because how would you know that testosterone could increase if you're giving a medication to block it from increasing? So I wasn't, and it did. And my testosterone levels now are higher than they are normally for me. I'm a low T kind of guy. I mean, my testosterone levels, I just went back to a study before I had cancer back in 2011. I had a very comprehensive metabolic workup around my testosterone levels. I had free levels and bound and the whole thing. It's about 220. That's about my range. I'm a 220 kind of guy. And now I'm up above 400. And, I don't know what the next value either of the testosterone or the PSA is going to be. But I do have trigger points for telling me when it's time to make a change. I think when you're doing this kind of, off the grid work, you, like I said, you have to know your tolerance levels, and you have to decide beforehand. It's good to have a trigger point beforehand, not to get stampeded into it or nervous, as the bad results start to pile up. So my trigger point is, if I see, at first I thought it was going to be if my T levels went too high, but now that's off the table. Apparently I can have high T levels and good progression downward on my PSA, so I'm not going to worry about the T levels staying high. But if I see a rate of progression of, like 3 months, no matter what the level is, if it's doubling in greater than 3 months, that's a warning sign. I better think about doing something. No matter how low the level gets, my oncologist said you might get to undetectable. I had no expectation that I would get anywhere near that. I had no expectation I would get down below 0.2. But I could be, but if I start to increase again at that rate, or if I get back up around 5, where I was when the Firmagon plateaued, I'm going to think about, what's my next step for plan B. But until then, I'm just going to ride this out and keep adding data points and, talking to people about it. I really appreciate the feedback that I've gotten from the Inspired group. I just, on a whim, decided that I would publish that. I'm also a member of You Are Not Alone, and I updated my results there, but I didn't hear anything from them. So you guys are really on top of things, and you picked up on an anomalous finding. This is how science advances. It advances by anomalous findings like this that people didn't anticipate and can't quite figure out. I've talked to several people. I talked to the pharmacist from the company that packages the Erlita for me. I've talked to people from my oncologist's office. There's a guy that I'm pretty close to, Otto Sankey, who's a research scientist, and he has his book Trouble with the Man Gland, and I figured if anybody could tell me what might be going on with this, how this would be, he would have a tentative explanation. He said, give me a couple of possibilities. He said, I really don't know, Al. I reached out to people from Janssen. I don't know if they're listening in today. I haven't heard back from anybody, but I think that's the question, obviously, is, first of all, can me and people in general sustain a downward progression of PSA in the face of high testosterone levels? Can you sustain it? And then you start to look for mechanisms, and that's where these, group studies come in at that point. But for me, I just want to know that something is working. And this is clearly working. It's doing something that was unanticipated and very delightful. There are side effects. I mean, it's not a vitamin, I haven't fallen, but I can understand why people fall. It's a little disorienting and a lot of fatigue. So, you don't lift your feet quite as high. So you curb, tripping and that sort of thing. I've had a couple of near falls associated with that, not dizziness, but I can see when falls were one of the biggest critical events that I think it's 13% or something, pretty high fall rate, a lot of fatigue. With Firmagon, I was getting very constipated, and with this, it tends to produce more loose stools, so that's been a pleasant change. But that's a side effect I'm beginning to notice. A GI sensitivity. It's not good for my GI system. But nothing that's certainly unmanageable, and nothing that I wasn't aware of beforehand in terms of those kind of side effects. I just never thought that I would be able to see that kind of increase in testosterone, and it feels really good. I feel frisky, I feel I feel like I've got testosterone in my system again, so that feels good. And if I just get a few months of that, so be it. That's me. That's my end of it.
Thank you very much, Al. I'm sure there's loads and loads of questions. Before I'm going to ask Len to moderate, since he is a lot more technical and a career scientist by training. I'm going to let him moderate the conversation and the questions, but I do want to welcome a couple of people on the telephone who joined us whilst you were speaking, Al. Would you like to identify, if you're comfortable, the two people that joined on the telephone?
Yeah, hey, this is David. I jumped in about 5 minutes after you started.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, David. And who's the other? Okay.
Phantom.
Phantom.
Somebody from my insurance company.
Yeah, we got a phantom call. Actually, that's a very good point. I mean, one of the things you didn't address, and hopefully we'll cover it, is how you and your doc managed to access the apalutamide. I'm sure there's a lot of guys that are wondering about that. But before you answer that, let me turn this to Len and let Len continue the next phase.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Everyone can hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yep. And thank you, Al, for sharing your story on Inspire, and then for coming on to our call to share it with our guys. There was a lot of interest in your experience, and we really appreciate it. It was very hopeful, and we wish you continued success. And I feel best place to start is, as Rick intimated, we could start with the insurance. So you said you're technically not castrate resistant, and you're not following the usual protocol of piggybacking on top of a first-line EDT drug. So and
I'm metastatic.
Yeah,
exactly. I wouldn't be accepted into the protocol, that's for sure. The insurance company initially declined to cover the medication, and I asked my oncologist, said, challenge it, please. And he did, and he must have wrote a pretty compelling challenge, because the next thing I heard, they accepted it, and I have zero copay. They send it right to my house. That's an interesting thing about the medication. They compound it at a pharmacy, and you communicate directly with the pharmacy. It doesn't go to the hospital. So the hospital gets no vigorish on this. It's all between you, the insurance company, and the pharmacy. It comes directly to my apartment. It's about $9,000 a month that they bill the insurance company. I have Medicare, and I have supplemental coverage from my state insurance, but I think my Medicare is covering all of it. I haven't really checked that carefully, but I think the last statement I got from indicated that they covered the entire cost of the medication.
okay, that's really good news. It seems like the better oncologists are somehow able to convince the insurance companies to cover drugs that they might not normally cover. Now, the other thing that interests me is you talked about the fatigue associated with Erlita. And I think most of us, certainly me, would have thought that with your T levels in the normal range now, that the fatigue issue wouldn't be that much of an issue. So I guess it suggests that the fatigue associated with Erlita, at least in your experience, is independent of your lack of independent of your testosterone level, and that maybe it's having some sort of direct effect on your CNS. At the recent PCRI conference, I asked Dr. Turner from Marina Del Rey, prostate cancer specialist, about the fatigue experience associated with Erlita, and he said, we're seeing that it's slightly less, which gave me the impression that it might not be significantly less. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know how they would know it's slightly less, because I don't know if too many people are taking it as a monotherapy. So how would you know what the effect of the Erlita was by itself without?
I'm sorry, Al, let me clarify. I had asked him, how did it compare to enzalutamide?
And do they have that kind of comparison where they had only Erlita and only
No, these were the usual protocols, just the first line ADT plus Erlita and first line ADT plus enzalutamide. How did those with fatigue?
Yeah, I know, Lynn. I maybe I'm not being. It just seems to me that they wouldn't know unless they're doing just a head-to-head comparison, and I don't know that they're doing any just head-to-head comparisons. In other words, if you're adding it on to a regimen that includes another medication, how would you know what the effect of the Erlita by itself was?
Well, I suspect most guys who add on enzalutamide will say that the fatigue levels have increased over and above what they were experiencing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Okay, so you're comparing it. I got you. Yeah.
So
I don't know. It's a funny thing. I have periods where I can be very focused and mentally clear. You know, I've always had that ability to, sort of like pinpoint my concentration. It's a function of my ADHD, I guess, that, when I sit down, I can do it. So it's not like I'm fatigued to the point to concentrate. I'm just tired, physically tired, not mentally, physically tired, particularly in the morning.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it could be that after having castrate levels of testosterone, that even though your levels are now in the normal range, it may take several months before you feel the full effect of a normal T level.
Okay,
Dr. George is shaking his head in agreement there.
That's good news.
Absolutely.
We can't hear you, George. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask him how long you were on Firmagon for.
About 7 months.
Yeah, when I was on it for 2 years, and it took me a good 2 years to get feeling better from the Firmagon. So even with normal testosterone levels, so I think there's a pretty long period of time where I think you have to wait. I don't know.
Well, that's encouraging too. Thanks. Yep.
Al, the other thing I wanted to ask you about before I turn it over to the guys is that you've already done Casodex monotherapy, and that worked for a while, but then didn't. And Erlita are essentially the same type of medication in that they both, or all three of them, sit on the androgen receptor, preventing testosterone from activating the androgen receptor. So I'm wondering, are you concerned that just as Casodex eventually stopped working as a monotherapy, that you'll have the same experience with Erlita?
The Casodex didn't really stop working as a monotherapy. I just wasn't able to or willing to tolerate it anymore. If you look at the graph, the PSA levels are still going down. It wasn't that I said, oh, it's just I sort of gave in to my oncologist's I don't want to say badgering, but he was pretty insistent that you're not doing anything for your cancer with this monotherapy. It's maybe not growing, but you're not treating it. And at that point, I said, okay, fine. And if I'm not treating it, I'm feeling this bad while I'm taking it, then I'm just going to stop. So that's what I did. He was pretty insistent that it wasn't doing anything as a mono. That was his opinion, that it wasn't doing anything for me to treat the cancer. It was just, and it's funny, they make these distinctions between the PSA and the cancer, and we still don't really have a good language even for describing the relationship between the two. I go into some length of discussing that in the paper. What is the relationship between PSA production and cancer growth and proliferation? And I just take it as a surrogate measure that each person seems to have their own signature, but certainly you can't use the values for diagnostic purposes. It's not a good screening tool. You can have high PSA and no cancer, and I had low PSA and very active cancer. So, but once you establish what the baseline relationship between your cancer and your PSA is, in my case anyway, and a number of people say this, that stays pretty consistent. Now toward the end of of cancer's progression, it does funny things in the way it throws off PSA. It doesn't necessarily grow exponentially anymore. It goes into a kind of different mathematical function. They call it a Compernian curve, if I'm saying that right. But early on, when cancer is growing, it tends to pretty much grow exponentially, and the PSA picks that up, particularly if you graph it on a semi-log chart like I've been doing. So it wasn't that the Casodex wasn't working; it's just that the side effects were becoming really, miserable.
Al, where
and
are
I
you
talked
being
to a few
treated?
other people who said that too. I'm sorry.
Where are you being treated?
Right now, it's at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City.
Who's your oncologist?
I guess I'm allowed to say that, right? Dr. O. He's sort of like a cult figure among people in our prostate cancer group. Dr. William O.
Yes.
He's really a great collaborator,
Yes, he is, and he's my oncologist also.
Okay. And you share the perception of him, right? I mean, he's just great.
He's fantastic. Yeah, I love the guy.
Yeah.
One last thing before I turn it over. So it's well known that Casodex as monotherapy can spike the incidence of guys getting gynecomastia. I assume the same would happen.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I assume the same would happen with monotherapy for Erlita. Do you have a strategy to prevent that?
Well, let me just tell you about the Casodex versus the Firmagon as far as breast. I mean, I had knockers, they were firm breasts and sore nipples. I mean, that was one of the things. I was miserable. The Firmagon was much less of that. Dr. O did suggest that he could radiate me if I wanted to. I'm a 73-year-old man, I'm not in great shape to begin with. I don't know, it'd be pretty cosmetic. I should probably do more upper body conditioning and see if I can tighten myself up that way. But I've thought about, radiation. They're not. I haven't noticed any sensitivity or any hardness of the tissue, but I have been warned, I guess, that you can expect that it's going to produce, even though you've got testosterone, you're still going to get the breast enlargement. And my next appointment with him is next month when I get my third test results, and we'll talk about that then.
Okay, right now I'd like to open it up to the rest of the audience that have any questions for you.
Can I jump in? This is David.
Who is it?
Yeah, hi, this is David. Hey, Al, I was wondering, you said your oncologist went to bat for you to get the apalutamide.
Yes.
Did you have any challenges getting the Provenge treatment with the insurance angle?
It's funny. So they're two different people. It was my urologist. I mentioned I was at a conference last year in Washington, D.C., the National State Coalition. I ran into a representative from the manufacturing company from Dendron. And, I was talking, and he said, I think you would qualify. There's a urologist in New York City, Dr. Matt Leamer. And he's another great find, too. He's great. So I went to see him, and I gave him my history, and he said, he pulled out the form to fill out, and he said, I'm not going to lie, but it looks like you found a loophole. And it was a Casodex trial, I think, that was my loophole. That, typically you would be expected to be castrate resistant. But since I failed a trial, and, it looked as if I failed the trial because I stopped, So he says, as long as I can describe this as a failed trial, that's how I'll describe it. And I had no trouble whatsoever getting the Provenge approved.
So the failure was basically the withdrawal of doing Casodex, even though your PSA was responding in a positive direction for you.
Yes, it was the side effects. And I think they allow for the failure to be either side effects that are too, unmanageable or harsh, or that the PSA progression stops.
Well, that's a great
But,
loophole.
He filled the form out, and he said, and I think the company is probably now trying to, to market it, more upstream for people like myself. But, he said, as long as I don't have to lie on the form, and he filled it out and answered the questions they asked, no trouble whatsoever.
That's interesting. I wouldn't say I'm similar, but I'm relatively early on this, and I'm on Caso and Firmagon, and just had surgery and all that. But I am totally on board with jumping on this immunotherapy-wise early on, rather than waiting, for my PSA to start climbing through the roof or whatever. But I'm just
it makes no sense whatsoever. It makes no sense whatsoever to wait until your immune system is already overextended and then try and revive it. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's just that I think it's a tricky threading of the needle to get this $100,000 treatment without having to actually pay for it, especially if you're early.
And the oncologists are bad mouthing it. I mean, it doesn't have a good street reputation among them. I mean, particularly at Sloan Kettering. I mean, people in my support group, oh, don't bother with that. Oh, that's not going to work. Oh, we've been told that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Because you don't get a PSA response, and if you're healthy, particularly, how are they going to know? You have to wait until you die. That's not much of an outcome, right? You have to wait until the patient dies, and most of these people were sick, so they were able to tell that the sicker people died sooner. But if a person's not sick, how are you going to know if it's working if it doesn't show its impact by bringing the PSA down.
Yeah,
The only thing that my wife pointed out to me this morning, she said, we had a really bad flu season. She got very sick. Everybody, in our family got very sick. I slept beside her the whole flu season, and I didn't get sick.
Yeah, I think
now, I don't know if that's a coincidence or what. If that's two different, functions of the immune system. But
Did they give you leucine along with that when they treatment?
Did they give me what?
Leucine? Like a booster?
I'm not sure what that is. Is that an antibiotic or?
No, it's well, Al can probably, Glenn could probably answer that.
I think David, did you say leucine?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Al, leucine is the scientific name is granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor. So DMCSF, and what it does is stimulates your white blood cell production. It does not stimulate, unfortunately, lymphocytes, which are probably the more important segment of white blood cells as far as fighting cancer is concerned.
I just got whatever the standard treatment was. I had the 3 sessions. I have very poor veins, so it was a effort getting the blood circulating and extracting the white cells and getting them back in. It was a problem for them, unpleasant, but other than that I didn't have any.
Yeah, actually,
I had flu-like symptoms. I had flu-like symptoms. I had runny nose, that sort of stuff, but nothing,
Yeah, Al, you just reminded me. When they do the leukapheresis with Provenge, when they remove your white blood cells and they modify them in the lab, they do add leucine, this GMCSF, yeah, to multiply the number of white cells before they reinfuse them.
Okay. So maybe that got me through the flu season.
Yeah, good.
So does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask Al?
Yeah, I have
just a quick one.
Clarification, Al. Did you say you're metastatic or you are not metastatic?
I am metastatic.
Okay, and where are your mets?
So I have, they're small. They're hard to find. They've only shown up kind of gradually. They're in my bones, and then there's a suspicious lymph cell, lymph tissue, the lymph node that looks like it's lighting up, but not very extensive with the lymph nodes. It's definitely in my bones.
And you've had the scan since you started on the Erlita?
No, and Dr. O's got it, and I kind of agree with him. He said that's the least of the outcomes that he's concerned with right now. It's more like quality of life, PSA regression, and we'll worry about the scan later. I've had so many scans. I don't want any more of those scans with a heavy lead. The gallium enhanced scans, I've had like 3 of those, I think. I know in England now they're limiting those to 2 or 3. I've had people say to me, there's no problem with them, but I don't think that what they're showing with the lead staying in your system after I would just rather not have so many of those anymore,
Right.
Where in your bones?
Don't get an argument out of me about scans, but the only measures you have is that your PSA is going down and your testosterone is going up. Is that correct?
Since I've started, that's the only measure I have. Right. Yep. That's right.
Okay.
Where in your bones, Al? In your pelvic area or in your spine?
Yeah, the pelvic area, yeah.
In the pelvic area. And John Appler had a question.
Yeah, real quick, Al. Once again, I appreciate your offense on defense so much. And I, two quick questions. Who is your insurance company, and do you have a plan D, I assume? And then the second question was, you mentioned in a post that you were able to determine you were becoming castrate resistant long before conventional criteria would have validated that judgment. I just wanted to see if you could explain more about that comment.
Okay. Yeah, well, the insurance company first. So I'm an elder, so I have Medicare Part A and B, and then I'm a state worker, so I've got a really great insurance plan with through my state insurance. It's Empire Plan, and that's my secondary coverage, though. So most of this has been covered by Medicare.
Good.
And then regarding, why I was able to make that inference, well, I mean, with my PSA having plateaued for the 5 months that it did, and being at castrate level as far as, having, single digit T results, for me, that's an indication that my cancer is eventually going to become castrate resistant. That's just my simple-minded way of thinking about it. But I just saw the writing on the wall. It's certainly not going to bring the depleting me of testosterone longer is not going to bring my PSA levels down any lower. That was pretty clear, and Dr. O agreed with me on that. So rather than just wait for them to start going up, the testosterone levels, both the T levels and the PSA, I just figured that this has run its course. So maybe it's not correct to say that I was becoming castrate resistant, but how else would you describe that?
Yeah. Okay, it's primarily the plateauing of the PSA. Yeah, I get it.
I mean, I'm not a medical doctor, but for me, the plateauing of the PSA in the presence of castrate level testosterone, and that's just a matter of time before I become castrate resistant in my mind.
Yep, good.
And, I think in terms of my other strategy was, one of the things we know that, Firmagon and Lupron and things are good for is bone pain in later stage disease. And I didn't want to, lose my ability to respond to that when I need it later on when I start to have bone pain.
Yeah. Len, anything else that you say, or is there anyone else on the call that would like to talk?
I have nothing else to ask Al. Does anyone else have questions for Al?
Well, I was just wondering if you had considered SBRT for the MET that was identified on bone.
I didn't quite catch that.
I was wondering if you'd considered gamma knife or SBRT for the mets that you believe you have in your bone and lymph.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing Xofigo even before the hormone therapy, and Dr. O said, no, let's not do that. I mean, again, I was so phobic about the hormone therapy, I'd rather have done the Xofigo, because at that time we knew I had bone mets. And he said, I think you're misreading. I said, I'd rather deal with those. He said, no, let's just do that more in sequence. So I said, okay, that's, so that's a plan B. The PSMA, now weaponizing the PSMA. From what I've been reading, there's a woman in Australia that presented a video that was on YouTube, sponsored by Urology, where she talked about her results with that as treatment. And that sounds pretty good, actually. So, I think all of us, the strategy should be try and stay as healthy as we can with as few side effects as we can until something better comes along than these medieval treatments that they're throwing at us now, because pretty much now it's just flash and burn, and I'd rather delay those as long as I can, but I'll do what I have to do to keep the cancer at bay until I won't.
Well, thank you very, very much. Just before we move on, I'll do a roll call and see who would like to talk. Is there anyone else that would like to ask Al a question? If not, we'll move on. Okay. So,
hey, great guys. I'm going to sit in.
Well, thank you very, very much, Al. We hope you'll come back to present your paper in a way that the guys can understand. We'll need you to do that on GoToMeeting and not on the phone, because that way we can make you the presenter and you can go through your slides, and that'll make it easier for everyone to follow. But just let us know when you're ready, and we're ready to invite you back. And of course, we'd love you to attend this forum regularly.
I'm going to try and do that more often. It conflicts with one of the meetings that I have, but on Tuesdays. But I'm going to see if I can, at least once a month or so. Yeah, well, I'm going to do that. It's a great group.
We also meet on a Monday.
Every other Monday at 8 o'clock, Al.
Oh, okay, that's better. Yeah, okay. No, I'll definitely try and do that more. You guys have been great, and I'll keep the results flowing on the the Inspire website too. Just the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Thank you. And stay in touch with Lem, because we now have two guys that are seeing Dr. O, and I think Len's very chuffed to learn that you had such a terrific and aggressive oncologist. Would that be fair to say, Len?
Yeah, maybe Al and I should make dual appointments with Dr. O.
We'll gang up on him, huh?
Yeah.
A tandem appointment with Dr. O. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Al.
Right.
Thank you, Al.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. Stay on the line if you like, Al.
I'm going to. Thanks.
Okay, so let me run down the list. I know a few people have dropped off, so if I call a name and you're not on the phone anymore, the rest of you will forgive me. First of all, I think Peter Kafka has left. Rich, do you have anything you'd like to talk about tonight?
No, I just came to hear what Al had to say.
Okay. Tom Van Zandt was with us, but I think he's left. Dennis Correa, have you got anything to talk to us about tonight?
Yeah, I'll give you an update on my latest visit with Dr. Singh.
Terrific. John Appler, anything for you?
I'm fine, Rick. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Larry Fish, anything that you'd like to raise tonight?
Not tonight, thank you, Rick.
Okay. Les Shelderup, anything that you'd like to talk to us about?
No, I don't think so. I just wanted to listen in. I just want to mention, though, I am currently calling in, waiting in line for radiation therapy at Mayo.
Oh.
It was very, very difficult to find a place where I could get online, but I finally made it.
Well, maybe we will come back to you and find out how you're doing up in Rochester there. So we looks like we have time, so we'll stop by you. Jake, anything you'd like to talk about?
No, I'm still recovering from last week, Rick.
Yeah. Do you think that last week gets you a free pass for like the next 3 months? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. All right. Len, anything for you?
Nothing, Rick. Thank you.
Okay. Looks like we lost Dr. George, unfortunately. Sylvester, anything you'd like to talk about?
No, thank you. Very informative
today. Ken Anderson, anything that you'd like to discuss? What did you think of that Elita monotherapy?
Yeah, no, I thought it was interesting for sure, and I thank you for sponsoring or getting it on. But I have nothing to chat about. I'm all good.
Okay. And David Bowles, anything that you'd like to talk about?
Well, just a quick response to something Al had mentioned about how he was not really too psyched about getting additional gallium scans.
Okay, so let's come back to you on that one. Okay.
Sure.
Well, I've got you down. And have I missed anybody who's currently on the call? Okay.
Rick,
yes.
I might, if anybody's interested, I can tell you about the gentleman study.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we'll come by. I'll stop by with you because it looks like we have time. So let's start with Dennis. Dennis, you saw Dr. Singh and
yeah, I went
tell
up to
us how
see
that went.
Dr. Singh at Mayo in Phoenix, and this was like a 6-month checkup point that I have established with him. And he just says we're going to stay the course because all my numbers are good. PSA is still staying steady at less than 0.1. All my other blood work stuff looks good. There's really no reason at this point to change anything. And he's going to schedule me in next April will be my next appointment. And that'll be a 1 year since I had my last bone scan. So he's going to do another bone scan at that time. And unless something changes during the interim period, that's the schedule with him.
That's great. So how long at this point have you been on Zytiga, on abiraterone?
Let's see. I don't have my papers in front of me. But it's the Zytiga is, I believe, about 6 months.
Okay.
And let's see, well, the Lupron is since the beginning, like 2 years ago.
Yep.
Along with the chemo, started with the chemo and the Lupron together. And then when I had that progression, that's when he added the, let's see, that's probably a year ago, a little over a year for the Zytiga. So this, that's about where we're at with that. Everything is going the right way, and I'm still standing upright and erect. So we're going to
how about your golf handicap? Is that going the right way?
What's that?
I said, how about your golf handicap? Is that going the right way?
No, unfortunately, that's going the wrong way. But it was kind of good because yesterday when I played yesterday, we had a team game set up for foursomes against foursomes. My foursome came in first place, so I can't quibble too much about it.
Okay.
But that's my biggest complaint is my fatigue. Towards the end of an 18-hole round, I'm dragging quite a bit. And I get home and shower and go to bed for a couple hours. It's just really fatigued. And then the other thing that happens is I tend to start getting leg cramps that come on sometimes while I'm in bed, and it's pretty much tied to my golfing. I'm probably stretching some muscles a little bit more than what they normally get stretched, and they're protesting later on.
What about hydration? Do you think it's related to hydration or not?
No, I do a lot of hydration. I do probably 2 Gatorade and a coconut water plus a couple of big cups of regular water in addition. That's all there in one 18-hole round. So I'm getting I went over this with Dr. Singh too, and he thought about asking hydration, potassium, and everything. So I told him what I was doing. He said, "No, you're fine there. You should be able to do that." But what I did do yesterday is before I started, I did a little bit of warm-up exercises, and then stretched my calves and leg muscles very gently. And when I finished the round, even though I was really exhausted, I did a little bit of a stretching. And I didn't get any cramps yesterday. And that's the first time. So that's the only thing I did differently.
Well, keep trying that and see how it does. But then, don't you have some sort of magic cramp?
Yes, TheraWorks. TheraWorks. It's a foam type thing. So it comes in this little pump can, and you take a couple of pumps, and you can use it before you think you might want to get a cramp, and it'll prevent it. Which I do when I play golf. I usually put it on, in the morning before I start, and then I'll take it with me. Like if I'm driving, that's the other thing. Sometimes I don't even get home if I'm the driver that day, and that cramp starts to come on. I have that with me. I can rub it on, and if I get it fast enough, it'll work so that my foot doesn't get bent out of shape, and where I can't control it at all.
Yeah, what's it called again, Dennis?
TheraWorks. TheraWorks. So that's over the counter. Right. It's homeopathic. It's on my list with Dr. Singh too, so he knows that I'm using it. So that's it's therapeutic. It helps.
Good.
Just to hop in for a second.
Sure. Please, Rich.
Muscle cramps or leg cramps? About a shot or a shot and a half of pickle juice.
Yeah, I've heard that. That along with
2 ounces of pickle juice.
It's that. The other thing that works too is what is it, like carbonated soda water that has some quinine in it. And I did some research on that, and it actually works through a part of the brain. It doesn't really work directly to the muscle. It sends some kind of a signal that gets picked up in your mouth from the taste of this stuff. Sends some kind of a signal to your brain to help you prevent muscle cramps. I have a friend of mine that plays golf with me. Also, he has Parkinson's. And that's his drink of choice after golf is he just gets a soda water that has the quinine in it.
Yeah, tonic water.
Yeah, tonic water. That's what it is. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm not sure about mixing pickle juice with tonic water, though, Rich. I don't know.
There is a drink with Hennessy and pickle juice.
Hennessy pickle juice. Okay.
I haven't tried it.
Oh, moonshine. Moonshine, right, Rich?
All right. Well, thanks. And Dennis, it's great to hear that, after 12 months or so on the Zytiga, that you're still holding steady, and it's great news. I mean,
looking to break out. Maybe I could set a world record here.
Well, the world record probably may well have belonged to dear Rob, who got 4 years out of Zytiga. But his disease was a little different to most people. But we're very happy to see you in the race there, challenging to be the next Zytiga poster boy. So it really is. It's great news. Les, before we lose you and you go in for some more radiation, tell us how you're doing up at Mayo, and how many sessions have you been through? How are you feeling? All that other good stuff.
Well, this coming up tonight in a few minutes will be my 5th session. had 3 last week and 1 yesterday, and I don't really feel anything different yet. But it's just beginning. I have 5-6 weeks of it, so I got a ways to go. And in that regard, I may leave here any second. As soon as they call me my name,
Absolutely.
I'm gone.
Yeah. Sure.
But so far I haven't had noticed any difference in how I feel or anything.
Is that an EBRT therapy?
Proton beam.
Oh, proton beam. Okay.
Yep.
And I should have included you before as the other person that has abdominal lymph metastasis, as well as Peter. So of course, one wonders whether abdominal lymph metastasis would include or exclude you from apalutamide, from Elida. That's a question we're going to have to get answered. I just don't know.
So I had a follow-up question about the proton beam therapy you're doing. Are they laying you down and kind of like strapping you to a table and then just shooting the beams in from 2 directions and that's pretty much it? Or do they rotate you around and stuff?
The beam rotates around. They don't strap you, but you're laying there and you have to lay still for about a half an hour. But the beam goes around you. It goes about 180 degrees or whatever, and they rotate you 90 or 180 degrees, and then it rotates on the other side.
Okay, so it's the gantry is like a big circular donut, and there's only one beam source, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's one beam source, and it arcs around you, and then they turn you around, and it arcs around the other side.
And they do it, so they're not just going in through one spot; they're going in through a full radius of spots onto the target.
Yes.
And is this a salvage therapy or is this primary treatment?
Well, I don't know what you would call it.
This is treatment,
ongoing.
Yeah, this is beyond salvage therapy for recurrence that appears to be in the abdominal area.
Oh, did you get RP or do you still have a prostate?
I had radiation treatment for the prostate. They decided not to do surgery because it was already engulfed in the prostate and seminal vesicles. I had Gleason 10, so it was pretty far along.
How did they, if you don't mind me asking, did they put like fiduciary markers inside of you surgically?
No, the markers are external. They just put some tattoos on you and then put little red marks on there so they can locate them and use that external marker to pinpoint where your body parts are.
Yeah. So if they're doing your prostate bed, they must have they're just doing the whole bed, or do they have some hot spots? Or I'm curious.
They're doing the lymph nodes. It's up higher. I had lymph node surgery down lower about 1.5 years ago that they removed 33 lymph nodes. 18 of them were malignant. Now they're going up higher and they're radiating the lymph node, like lymph node band or bands.
How did they find them? Did they find it by PMSA or?
It's here at Mayo. They use the C11 choline PET scan, and that's how they showed up.
Right. I'm just curious about that because I came out of RP about a month ago, and the surgeon could not get one of the lymph nodes. It was too close to the artery or something like that, and it was one of the ones that showed up positive on a PMSA scan. So I'm thinking I might want to avail myself to that kind of therapy if if it's applicable. So I was just curious about what you were going through on that.
Yeah, the proton beam, they can pretty well pinpoint very small area. So it might be something to look into.
Yeah. And then on a different subject, Rick, but probably not completely unrelated, when Al was talking about being a little bit gun shy about more gadolinium scans and such due to the speculative toxicity of that element, that there is a treatment for that because it does tend to deposit in your tissues and kind of get stuck there. And that is you can get EDTA, intravenous EDTA therapy for that, and you can wash it out pretty good. My nephew, who's a doctor, went in for a bunch of scans because he had some cancer in his kidneys, and he got loaded up pretty good with gadolinium. And when he was done with that, he did 4 or 5 IV treatments of EDTA, and then he did a follow-up because he was curious with the 24-hour urine collection, and was able to measure substantial amounts of gadolinium that had been extricated from his tissues. And so it's just something to keep in mind if people are worried about that.
This is Al just jumping in and asking a question. So, my oncologist had played down the amount of gadolinium that is left behind. So you're saying there was enough there to show up before and after, that there was quite a bit that was taken out by this treatment.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's good to know.
I have a couple of questions. The first is, what does EDTA stand for? Do we know?
It's a preservative that's in a lot of foodstuffs because it binds up normally +2 charged ions like calcium, and I forget all the ones that are in the periodic table that fit that, but it's really good at getting out lead. It's called ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid, and it's used in kind of off-circle preventative medicine clinics where they use it. They'll use it for folks that are trying to detoxify, or it has presumed effects for getting rid of calcium plaques in your arteries and that kind of thing. So it's available. It's out there. It's just you're not going to find it at the Mayo Clinic, but there's probably 300 or 400 doctors in the country that do it. So.
Rick,
yes.
I just wanted to add, it's considered a chelating agent, and
right.
EDTA is if you ever have a CBC taken in a lavender top tube for your blood, you'll see a little drop of fluid at the bottom, a clear fluid. That's EDTA, and it binds the calcium in your blood, preventing it from clotting.
Correct.
Yep. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's pretty common. It's a relatively cheap chemical compound. It's all over the place. So the treatments are relatively reasonable. They're about $125 a pop, I think, last time I looked into it.
So this is the second time that this has come up in 2 days and 2 sessions. On the low risk call yesterday, one of the attendees was Mark Lichty, who is one of the main protagonists in this Icelandic active surveillance group, and he's well associated with PCRI, and he was very concerned about gadolinium and the scanning. And the question that I have was, we know that gadolinium is not a particularly beneficial element to have running through your body. What sort of studies are out there? Does anyone have any knowledge of the adverse effects that gadolinium has actually been shown to have? Or from scanning, I'm talking about. In other words, do we know anybody who's had multiple scans over the years who can identify a comorbidity, a side effect with an excess of gadolinium?
I'm not aware of any of the studies, but I know it's not prima facie evidence when you point to ambulance chaser lawyers who are trying to sue everybody for everything, but there's all kinds of these crazy nut job lawsuits for gadolinium toxicity. I'm aware of that. So.
Well, you know, I guess where I'm coming from is that we have guys on this call who have been fighting the disease for a very long time and have had innumerable MRI scans and CT scans. I'm not sure, is gadolinium associated just with the PET scans only? Is it associated where there's a tracer agent, or?
I believe it's used as a contrast agent for MRI is the main purpose.
As a contrast agent for MRI. Okay, so
yep.
So but it's not it's not used in the CT technology at all.
I don't know about that.
Len thinks not.
No.
But, I mean, we know people that have had so many MRIs, and I have to say, and this is 100% anecdotal, but I don't think we've ever had anybody raise the issue of an adverse effect from gadolinium. That's not to say they may not have had them, but they weren't aware of them. And you know, now all of a sudden it seems to be fairly center on the radar screen. So I'm wondering, is this something that we really have to take seriously, or is it just a bit of a legal fad, and people are getting anxious over a comorbidity that for most men is not present?
I think the problem, part of the problem is that
Go ahead, Jake.
This is Al. In our group, the male care group, Daryl Middledorf has been pretty much on this. Apparently, in England, they've limited the number of scans that you can have to 3.
Lifetime, is that, or annually,
yeah.
or what?
Yeah, lifetime.
Well, I've certainly not heard of that, but it's easy enough for me to check that up. And you know, when we say they, does that mean the National Health Service, or
the National Health Service is what he described as, how he described it. Yeah.
Well, I will verify that. It's easy for me to verify that.
And that could be financial more than just,
well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that it may have more to do with a financial regulation, but I have a very, very close friend who's a diagnostic radiologist, and her husband's a surgical oncologist, and I will find out from them to what extent they're limiting MRIs, and she works in both systems, private and NHS. But you know, I am Jake. You had something you wanted to say.
I was just going to say that from what I understand is that the gadolinium problem it's a cumulative issue. The more you have, the worse it gets. I'm trying to look for an article here. There's a Nature article talking about it, and they're saying that the chelating or chelating agents don't really have that much of a beneficial effect. I'll post that, but it's, you know, I don't know, it might be a little bit technical. It's a little bit technical for me. But yeah, my understanding is that it is a cumulative effect of the gadolinium. So the more you have, the worse it gets.
And what does it do? What are the side effects?
That I don't know.
Rick, I just did a quick and dirty, came up with an article in PubMed stating that gadolinium as a contrast agent for MRI is generally recognized as safe. There is a slight possibility of nephrotoxicity, toxicity to the kidney, but it's uncommon. I'll paste the link into the chat box.
Thanks, Len.
Yep.
You know, I just, it concerns me because I think that the MRI can be a very helpful tool for men on the treatment path. And many men are already very anxious when they're in the disease process. And I don't like to see additional unnecessary anxiety caused unless there's good reason for it. If there's good reason for it, I see nothing wrong with it. But
well, you know, the thing is that I think, I mean, I don't know a lot about this, but I think a lot of these agents that are used in the context of diagnostics, they don't get, obviously they don't get the same kind of shake that you get with, you know, therapeutic regimes that have to go through full FDA, you know, level 1 through 3, you know, clinical studies and stuff like that. I don't think it's as rigorous as my recollection. So there may not be a lot of, you know, really deep epidemiological info on this thing, even though, I mean, I could probably say every other person I've run into has probably had an MRI in their life, you know, but.
Well, Rick, if you remember last night, the gentleman, I think it was Mark, was he the one?
Yeah, Mark Lichty.
Yeah. He said he refused to get the gadolinium, and as did I. And the doctor told me, and his doctor both told him that the scan was just fine without the gadolinium. So it's just something that doctors routinely order, but apparently it's not that. It makes it a little bit easier to see the contrast, but it's not impossible.
Well, I think they have some new.
One at
I was
a
going to
time.
say they have some new algorithms that they're using with these high intensity MRI scanners, the 3T scanners, and where it's a lot more software based in terms of how they pull out the contrast or whatever. So you're probably right. It's probably a great billable procedure, you know, to add on.
John
I'm from the generation, you know, when you would go into the shoe store and they had the X-rays, you know, oh, look at your feet, you know, and the bone, you know, and it was like, oh, this is fun, you know.
Yeah.
I just think if you don't need them, you probably shouldn't get them, you know, and particularly if they're leaving behind such traces in the brain tissue, you know, that's where it's showing up, as well as in the liver. Lead in the brain is not good.
Well, is gadolinium equivalent to lead? Is it the same? Is it a lead-based compound?
When I say lead, it's a heavy, isn't it? It's a heavy metal.
Okay. I think it's called the lanthanum. It's one row over, but it's very heavy. Okay. That's why it has so much contrast to it. I mean, it's dense, you know, but it's a +3 charge element, so it's not quite like lead, which is +2 when it's flowing around. But I was just doing a little reading on it right now, and it does compete with some of the other elements that, like calcium and stuff like that, for position on, you know, receptors and stuff.
So Al, do you think we should be suing StartRight for all those little green X-rays that we had as kids when we went up on that machine? And
I don't know. I responded to one of those things on the internet though about the gadolinium lawsuits. I never heard back from. I don't know. You know, I know there's ambulance chasers out there that are trying to make some money on it, but I don't know.
Well, I have to say I need to see more evidence before I start telling guys that they should do some research on gadolinium. I mean, if Jay, you don't want to include it, by all means, but I don't think it should be used as a reason not to get an MRI, which was what we heard last night. So, but it's interesting. It came up 2 nights in a row, eh, Jake? I don't know. Okay, so if we've exhausted gadolinium, let's go to Jake to talk to us a little bit about the gentleman study. You know, that's kind of a misnomer, especially since you got one of those packages. Well, I'm confused. Sort me out, will you please?
Well, me too, but they didn't have a chance to see me or talk to me, so they sent it by error.
Okay.
They only know. Anyway, we talked about the gentleman study several weeks ago. I don't know, a week or two or so ago. I forget who brought it up originally. And anyway, I signed up for it. I did put, those of you who are online, I put the link in the chat box if you want to sign up for it. What they do is they give you a preliminary survey, basically, and it takes about 40 minutes to fill out. And they ask you a lot of questions about yourself, and they also want to know about your family history. You know, your mother, your father, your brothers and sisters. Did it kill them, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end, they ask you for a number of scans. Like they ask you for the latest PSA reading. They ask you for your latest, bone scan or CT scan or whatever. They want you to include as many of them as possible, which I was able to do. I had them all on my computer. And then about a week later, they send you this kit. You can't see it, but it looks to me, yeah, you see it says color. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks to me to be the same kit that the metastatic prostate cancer project sent. It's by Origene DX, and all it is a test tube. And Len, you asked a question the other day. I think you do have to fill the whole thing up. And I haven't done it yet because they tell you have to go for half an hour without eating or drinking even water. And I haven't managed to do that yet, but I just got it yesterday. So anyway, it's free. They do send you the results. Apparently, they're mainly, I think the main genes that they find or they look for are BRCA1 and BRCA2, but there are a number of other ones, and they do send you the results online, and then you can take that to your doctor and discuss it further. So, it's painless. You know, it's like I said, you got to spit in the tube. I don't know if you can see. I don't want to open it up yet because I don't want to open it until I actually do it.
Okay.
So,
I can add to that.
I'm sorry.
On that color test, I might want to mention that I just did that about 3 months ago. They also have a genetic counselor that you can call up and chat with about it, and I did that as well, and I found them to be extremely knowledgeable about all the different gene variants, and kind of dug in pretty deep in terms of what the probability of this and that and the other thing, and so that was a pretty useful exercise for me.
Do they identify? It's about 30 genes total, correct?
Yeah, I want to say that's about right.
Okay.
I think they said 33.
The possible drug treatments?
No, they won't go there with that.
Okay, they just tell you if you're positive or negative.
And they also go in. There's like all kinds of variants. Like some are more significant than others, and it's there's a lot of science behind it, and
right.
Like I can't even do justice to it just because I don't really remember very well, but it was pretty involved. I mean, and I think too that information can be used if somebody wants to take it and really run with it and go out and dive deep into it. I wouldn't be. I can't imagine too many doctors would be up to snuff on this stuff unless they did it too. You could go in and talk to them, and they might not know much about it at all.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. So did you show it to your doctor? Did he or she find any value in it?
Yeah, I went to this one guy, and because I was getting ready to do radiation therapy, and I asked him about it. And he said, "Well, it could be useful, it could be bad. It's interesting." And I thought, okay, that's not good enough. So I switched doctors to a geneticist doctor, and got a little bit more, deep into it, and got a better understanding of what's going on. So kind of had to chase it.
I think the main concern is the BRCA1 and BRCA2. And if you're BRCA positive, then you're more likely to have certain kinds of cancers. Is that correct, Rick and Len?
Yeah, I mean, I think BRCA is important, but then, Peter found out that he had Lynch syndrome when he did the test. I can't remember if his was Color or one of the other providers. He did it through UCSF. There's about, as Len says, there's 33 odd genes, and these are all inherited mutations. So we're only considering inherited mutations here. And for example, in Peter's case, he now does an annual colonoscopy, and he has his boys do more regular colonoscopies than they ever would have done before. And of course, he wasn't looking for a mutation in the Lynch syndrome line. So there are several mutations that can be actionable. But BRCA is an important one, yes. BRCA1 and BRCA2 are important. David, what was the sticker price on that test? Was it $250?
I want to say it was about 150, I think.
Yeah, I think that's correct. That's what I saw. 149.
149. Okay.
Yeah.
Of course, they may have.
That's pretty much, they're losing money at that price. I can guarantee you that. But I don't think that's what their end game is. I think their business model is data accumulation. I think that's where they're going with it. So.
Yeah, that's what I'd be concerned about. Is free.
There's no charge for the gentleman study.
Yeah, I'd be more concerned on the privacy issues of what are you giving away, and who's getting it, and what are they going to do with it?
Well, yeah, I think. I mean, if I'm just a little speculation on that, but if you are a pharma company and you're doing research on, prostate cancer with ATM gene defect or whatever, and you're trying to find new drugs to develop, you'd probably go to somebody like them and say, okay, we want to buy your database for this particular subset of people, and kind of look at what other kind of genes they have going on and see if we can't, develop a drug that targets this, that, and the other thing. And that would be my thought of how they would use it,
Which basically means that the information's for sale, just depends on who's going to buy.
Oh, yeah. Rich, you make a good point, Rich, because these online DNA tests like 123 Ancestry, whatever. Somebody
put in jail quick.
Apparently, yes, exactly. Somebody apparently they got a hold of his DNA, and they tied him into a crime from 40 years ago.
Yep. They're not private. The information's not private.
Right.
No, it's not. It's like giving away the ultimate social security number. But I guess, the way I look at it is, I've got metastatic prostate cancer, and I just, if I can find any leverage point that might help give me a better treatment, I guess at this point in my life, I'm willing to say, okay, what the hell, And it's unfortunate that that's what it looks like. But I know that Google, for instance, I believe they own them, or they purchase a large percentage of one of these heredity companies. I forget which one. I mean, and something like Google is not doing it for, they have their own different way of looking at stuff, and it's all about information. So
that was the business model I was thinking of, was, Google for DNA for, prostate cancer, which 200,000 men a year get diagnosed. That's a nice market.
I don't know if you guys outside of New York City noticed about Sloan Kettering's violation with their lab sharing information with companies.
Mm-hmm. I recall something about that, but can you fill us in on that, Al?
As I started to say it, I realized, I don't know what it was exactly. A lot of the labs, though, were upset because their information that they were gathering in their labs for their research purposes were being sent to one of these big data, crunching companies without their permission, the lab heads. So I think they were more upset that their lab information wasn't so much from the standpoint of patient protection as the labs were pissed off. It's been a rough week for Sloan Kettering, with the chief medical officer and his disclosure or non-disclosure forms, and then that coming out at the same time. They're must be a little shell shocked there.
Well, Rick, if I'm not here in a month, you'll know what happened. They caught up with me.
They'll have found out that you really weren't a gentleman. I think Jake used Sylvester Mann's name when he submitted his application.
At least I'll become well known.
David Bowles, have you submitted a sample to the Metastatic Prostate Cancer Project?
What do you mean a sample?
Well, the Metastatic Prostate Cancer Project is it's a project we endorse. As far as
are you talking about a tissue sample?
Well, no, I think the sample, gents, it involves a tissue sample which they follow up and get directly, but you just submit a blood sample and a spit sample, isn't that right? Who's actually done it?
Yeah,
I didn't give them a blood sample. I know I'm wrong. I did give them a blood sample. Correct me. I'm sorry.
Right.
It's both
saliva and
saliva and blood. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same.
This is the Broad Institute. Is we talking about the same thing?
Yes, it is the Broad Institute.
Broad Institute, right? Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
That's correct. It's the Broad Institute study. So, Len, you just want to say a word about it for David and anybody else on the call who isn't aware of it?
Well, it sounds very similar to the Gentleman Project, only as you mentioned, Rick, the Gentleman Project seems to be limiting itself to inherited gene mutations, whereas the Metastatic Prostate Cancer Project also is looking at somatic or tumor mutations in addition to germline or inherited mutations.
Right.
And I just got an email today from Ellie Van Allen giving an update on the project. Maybe you got one too, Jake.
I did.
Yeah. And they said they're going to come out with some preliminary results before the end of the year. So we'll be hearing from them.
Yeah.
So, David, if you go to our website, you'll find a presentation by Ellie to us earlier this year on the project, what it is, what it's about, how you participate in it. They actually had a desk at PCRI that they were sharing with with Joel Nowak. And Joel is a big booster of this project. And you don't derive any personal information from it, but they keep you well apprised of any discoveries they are making. And the idea is to try and better understand some of the genetic mutations in prostate cancer, some of the somatic genetic mutations in prostate cancer. So
it's sort of you're saying it's more of a collective effort, like everybody's just going to contribute their data points, and then they'll take that and kind of create some sort of a large-scale informatic assessment. Yeah.
Exactly. You're not identified in this study. So your privacy should be assured, and it's modeled on a couple of other studies for other cancers, and
sounds good.
So we encourage.
I'll tell you what, I know one thing for sure. When they were rolling me in the doors to cut me open, there was this person standing next to me who was getting me to sign off on all my tissue for their research, quote unquote, and they were pretty tenacious. Kind of funny.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, we have filled up another couple of hours, and the first hour and a quarter. Thanks, very sincere thanks to Dr. Alfat and his experience to date, and we wish you continued success with that experience. Hopefully we'll be talking to you a year from now, and you'll be telling us that your testosterone is still, in the mid hundreds, and your PSA is undetectable. That's what we want to hear, Al.
Great. You mentioned Joel before. Joel has this great line: "I want to live long enough to get run over by a New York City bus."
Right.
Well, that could happen to him tomorrow. I wouldn't wish for that.
Well, that's true too. Be careful what you wish for, right?
So our next meeting is October 1st, next week, next Monday night. We'll be meeting at 8 o'clock Eastern, and it'll be back to a regular meeting again. We welcome everybody, and wish you all a good end of the week, or middle of the week and end of the week, and speak to you next week. Good night.
Hey guys, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rick. Good night, everybody.